Introduction and initial setup. It was a quiet Tuesday, one of those ordinary days when nothing extraordinary happens, and life flows like it always does, routine and predictable. I was in the living room, scrolling through the endless wave of bills on my laptop. Jason, my 10-year-old son, sat on the couch, trying to focus on his homework, while the hum of the coffee maker and the occasional tapping of the keyboard in the background filled the silence. The house felt warm, like it always did, with that almost too comfortable sense of normalcy. But nothing prepares you for the unexpected. I didn't know that in the next few hours, my entire world would come crashing down around me. It all started with a notification that popped up on my screen. Your balance has fallen below the minimum threshold. My heart skipped a beat. The college fund I had set up for Jason's future had been meticulously saved over 6 years. Laura, my wife, and I had always agreed that the money was untouchable. A promise to our son. It was our way of ensuring his future, no matter what happened. But that message made no sense. I logged into the account, half expecting to find a glitch or some error. But instead, the truth hit me like a freight train. The account was empty, not just low, empty. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none fit. I called Laura's name, my voice trembling, but there was no answer. Panic gripped me. I tried again, louder this time, but it was still silent on the other end of the house. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? Something about the situation felt wrong, and then the pieces began to fall into place. Laura had been acting differently for the past few weeks, distant, avoiding questions, brushing me off with vague excuses. I had chalked it up to stress, to the daily grind of life. But now it all made sense. I had been blind. I reached for my phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. Again and again, I called, only to be met with the same silence. My heart was pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong. Jason wandered into the room, munching on an apple, oblivious to the storm brewing around us. Where's Mom? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for his sake. She said she had to go somewhere. Jason replied with a shrug, taking another bite. The words stung. Somewhere. That was all he knew. My mind raced, and the truth finally clicked into place. Laura had disappeared. She'd taken the money, emptied the account, and walked out on us. She'd chosen herself over her family. And now I had no idea where she was or why she would betray us this way. Discovering the extent of the betrayal. The silence in the house was deafening. Jason didn't know the full scope of what had happened, and I didn't want him to. But I knew I had to act fast. I opened our joint credit card account, the last place I thought I'd find anything suspicious. But what I saw nearly knocked the breath out of me. There were transactions, lots of them, flights, luxury hotels, fine dining. Everything pointed to one thing. Laura was halfway across the country, living it up while our son's future was being destroyed. I stared at the screen, seething with anger, betrayal, and confusion. How could she do this? How could she take from our son, from the one person who had nothing to do with our problems? My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. Jason came over, sensing something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. He just sat there, eating his apple, looking at me with innocent eyes that made the whole situation feel even more tragic. I tried to call Laura again, but she didn't answer. It wasn't until later that night that I discovered her suitcase was gone. She had left just like that. And the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't coming back. She had emptied the account, packed her bags, and walked out on me, on Jason, on everything we had built together. Anger surged through me. a force I couldn't control. But it wasn't just anger at Laura, it was anger at myself for missing the signs, for letting things get this far without noticing. Jason, ever the curious one, had been watching me from across the room. He didn't seem to grasp the weight of the situation, and maybe that was for the best. He had no idea what had just happened. But as I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with him too. He was acting different, more mature, more composed than a 10-year-old should be. He didn't seem shocked, didn't seem upset, just quietly observing. And that's when I began to notice the small things, the late night trips to the garage, the quiet whispers on his phone, the strange look on his face when I asked him about it. At first, I dismissed it. He was just a kid, right? Maybe he was trying to make sense of all this, just like I was. But then I found something in the garage that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just toys or Legos scattered around. No, there were blueprints, codes, and detailed diagrams on the whiteboard. Jason was working on something I didn't understand. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off as a school project. But this wasn't schoolwork. It was too sophisticated for that. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Jason knew more than he was letting on. He had been quietly handling the situation in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. And that was when I realized Jason was already trying to fix things in his own way. Jason's increasingly secretive behavior. The days following Laura's departure were a blur. I was barely able to function, consumed by a toxic mixture of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. The house felt hollow without her presence. I had to figure out what to do next. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could handle this on my own. Jason, however, seemed completely unaffected by the chaos. He went about his daily routine with eerie calmness. Still going to school, still completing his homework, still playing with his Legos as though nothing had changed. But I knew better than to believe that kids process grief and trauma in their own ways, and Jason's behavior wasn't typical. It wasn't normal for a 10-year-old to act as though nothing had happened. It started with little things. Glimpses of him typing on his tablet at odd hours. His eyes focused and intense. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe it was just schoolwork. But there was an urgency in his movements, a secretive energy that made me uncomfortable. One evening, I walked into the living room to find him hunched over his tablet, his fingers flying across the keys. When he saw me, he quickly minimized the screen and casually said, "Just doing homework." Dad, I didn't press him. Not immediately. After all, he had always been good with technology, coding and gaming. But something didn't sit right. It was as though he was hiding something from me, something much bigger than a school project. Later, the whispers on his phone became more frequent. I caught him in the kitchen one evening, his phone pressed to his ear. When I asked him who he was talking to, he froze, looking guilty for the first time in days. Nobody, he muttered, quickly, stuffing the phone into his pocket before bolting out of the room. I didn't press further, convincing myself it was just a friend, or maybe even a counselor from school. But the strange behavior didn't stop. Jason began spending more and more time in the garage. At first, I thought he was simply working on one of his usual engineering projects. He had always been a hands-on kid, but there was something about the way he shut the door behind him, the way he locked it whenever he was inside, that made me uneasy. I waited for a few days before I decided to go into the garage and see what was going on. And when I opened the door, I was met with something I never expected. A whiteboard covered in detailed diagrams and equations. It looked like something out of a spy movie. Codes, charts, and plans I couldn't begin to understand. Jason was sitting at his workbench, soldering something that looked like a listening device. When he saw me, he quickly stood up and tried to block the whiteboard with his small frame. But it was too late. What is all this? I asked, my voice shaky with confusion. Nothing, Dad. Just a school project, Jason replied too quickly, his face flushing red. A school project. I raised an eyebrow. Since when does fourth grade require surveillance equipment? Jason's face grew redder. For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth, but instead, he muttered, "You wouldn't get it." Before packing up his tools and heading back inside, I stood there for a long moment, staring at the whiteboard, my head spinning. Jason wasn't just playing around. He was working on something serious, something I couldn't yet comprehend. And as the days went on, the strange behavior only escalated. Jason started asking me questions I couldn't quite understand. He'd ask about Laura's finances. Did I know her passwords? Did I know if she had any offshore investments? At first, I thought he was just curious, maybe trying to piece things together. But I soon realized something darker was at play. Jason wasn't asking because he didn't know. He was asking because he needed the information. One evening, I had enough. "Jason, what's going on?" I asked, my voice firm. "Why are you asking all these questions?" Jason just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm fixing it," he said calmly. "Fixing what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "You'll see," he replied, before walking away, leaving me standing there with 1,000 questions I didn't have the answers to. The chilling revelation. The following morning, I found Jason in the kitchen again, typing furiously on his tablet. I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Jason," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" Jason froze for a moment before looking up at me, his face calm and collected. "I'm just working on a project, Dad." I tried to suppress the unease creeping up my spine. "What kind of project?" "Just a project," he repeated. But there was something in his voice, something that told me this was no ordinary school assignment. I didn't push him any further. What could I do? My son, the child I thought I knew, was becoming someone else, a person I couldn't quite recognize. The tension in the house grew thicker as Jason's behavior became more secretive. He began locking his tablet, locking the garage door whenever he worked, and even covering up his whiteboard with a sheet. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't for school, and it certainly wasn't a hobby. I had no idea what he was planning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason was taking things into his own hands in a way I couldn't control. It wasn't until Laura called again that things finally began to unravel. I was in the kitchen, staring at the broken window that still hadn't been fixed, when my phone rang. I froze when I saw the caller ID. It was Laura. My first instinct was to ignore the call, to block her out completely. What could she possibly say that would change anything? But a small part of me, a part I couldn't quite silence, wanted to hear it. Wanted to hear her explain herself. Against my better judgment, I answered the call. "What do you want?" I said coldly, my voice sharp with the years of betrayal and pain that had built up inside me. "Alex, please, you have to help me," Laura said, her voice trembling with fear. "Something's gone wrong. Everything's gone wrong. Damian is gone. Everything's frozen. The police, they're looking for me." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She sounded desperate. But there was no sympathy in me. Not anymore. "I don't think I can help you," I said flatly. "You took everything from us. You chose Damian over our son. Please, Alex, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought Damian would take care of everything. But now I'm stuck. I have nothing." "Good," I replied bitterly. "You deserve this. You made your bed. Now you lie in it." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a soft, broken voice came through. "Alex, please!" "For Jason. He deserves to have his mother." My chest tightened. For a moment, I almost wavered, almost felt a pang of guilt for what had happened, but I quickly shut it down. Laura had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. Jason doesn't need you, I said coldly. He's had to grow up faster than any kid should have to. He's done more for this family than you ever have. I heard Laura's voice crack on the other end. She was sobbing now, but I didn't care. She had abandoned us. Now she would have to face the consequences. Jason's bold actions and growing power. I was still reeling from the call with Laura when I turned around and saw Jason standing in the doorway, watching me with that calm, unreadable expression on his face, the same look he had been wearing ever since the day Laura had left. It was as if he knew something I didn't, something I couldn't understand. Understand. You didn't let her off the hook, did you? Jason asked, his voice steady and precise. No, I said slowly, my heart heavy. No, I didn't. Jason nodded, a small, satisfied smile curling on his lips. Good. She doesn't deserve our help. I watched him for a moment, trying to find the words to express how unsettled I was by all of this. My son, who should have been broken and confused, had become a cold, calculating figure. And what worried me even more was how effortlessly he seemed to navigate this treacherous situation, like he was born for it. The house was eerily quiet after the call with Laura. The calm that followed Damian's arrest should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. Jason spent most of his time in the garage, working on his projects, as though everything was normal. But I knew better. I could feel the unease in my gut, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger was unfolding in front of me. It wasn't until the next morning that I got a glimpse of what Jason had been doing in secret. I walked into the living room, still half asleep, only to see Jason hunched over his tablet again, typing furiously. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Jason, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. What are you doing? He froze for a moment before looking up at me. Just working on something, he said, his voice calm and almost detached. I walked closer, my heart pounding. What's that? Jason didn't answer. Instead, he turned the tablet toward me, revealing a series of complex bank statements, transaction logs, and what looked like coding scripts. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what I was looking at. I fixed it, Jason said simply, as if explaining how to solve a math problem. What? I asked, my voice shaky. The money. Mom took it, but I put it back, he said, as though it were no big deal. My stomach dropped. I stared at him, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. What do you mean? You put it back. Jason turned the screen back toward himself and began to explain. It wasn't that hard. I just used the password Mom had saved on her phone to access the account. I transferred the money back where it belongs. He paused for a moment, then added, I also took care of some other things while I was at it. I was speechless. This wasn't just a simple matter of retrieving the money. This was something much bigger. Jason had hacked into accounts, tracked down all the transactions, and restored the funds. The more I looked at the scene, the more I realized he had done much more. There were reports of investments, suspicious transfers, and evidence that Damian had been running a long-running scam. You reported him. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jason nodded. Yeah. I gave all the evidence to the police. They'll find him, and they'll find Mom, too. She helped him spend the money, so now they know everything. I stood there, frozen, as I processed his words. Jason, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, you understand that what you've done is illegal, right? I did what had to be done, he replied calmly. Mom and Damian hurt us. They took what was ours. I made it right. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was not the behavior of a 10-year-old. This wasn't just a kid trying to get back at someone. This was a calculated, strategic move something far beyond his years. The repercussions of Jason's actions. As much as I tried to wrap my head around everything Jason had done, I couldn't deny the truth of his words. He had fixed things. He had taken control of a situation that I couldn't even begin to understand. But at what cost? The next few days were a whirlwind. Laura's calls became more frequent, but I refused to answer. I couldn't bring myself to listen to her, plead for help after everything she had done. But Jason never seemed bothered by it. He moved through life with the same quiet confidence, the same unsettling calm that had started to feel like a weight on my chest. That was when Damian made his move. It started with a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Damian sneered, his voice dripping with venom. I froze. "Damian," I said flatly, "what do you want? You think you've won, don't you?" He spat. "You think your little hacker fixed everything. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." I glanced at Jason, who was sitting across the room, completely unfazed by the conversation. He didn't even look up. "What are you going to do, Damian?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "You're broke. You're wanted. You're finished. I'm not going down alone." Damian growled. "I know where you live, Alex. I know where your son goes to school. If you think I'm just going to sit back and let you ruin me, you're dead wrong." My blood ran cold. Damian wasn't bluffing. This wasn't over. I knew it. Jason knew it. And I could feel the weight of his threat hanging over us. But as I looked at Jason, who remained unmoved, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a game to him. Jason stood up, walking toward the door, his face calm and determined. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to be careful, but I couldn't. "Let him try," Jason said, his voice cold as ice. "He won't get far." It was at that moment that I realized how much things had changed. My son, my sweet, innocent boy, had become someone else. Someone capable of handling the danger, the threats, and the chaos that had completely shattered our lives. And as much as I wanted to protect him, I had to admit that he had already taken control of this situation in ways that I couldn't have imagined. As the days wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason was playing a dangerous game. A game I wasn't sure I understood, but he was playing it well. And for now, that was enough to keep us safe.